is this election that just took place in Massachusetts and stuff. And I think that one of the things I found interesting about it was that some Democrats seemed to be surprised by what happened. Were you surprised? LaRue, we'll start with you. Were you surprised by the election result?
Unfortunately, I wasn't surprised, right? Because when you take an election or a seat for granted, these are the results you get. When you continue to put out people who aren't doing anything innovative or toting the party line, then you can expect to get results that are going to clash with that. Because people in Massachusetts in particular were voting against traditionalism, not necessarily voting for a new candidate, but voting against a prescribed notion of democracy in the Democratic Party.
Who's Scott Brown? I mean, I know the Democrats would have wished they had Jerry Brown or John Brown, but who's Scott Brown?
Yeah, and the point was Scott Brown didn't have to be anybody. He was somebody different, right? Yeah. He got an overwhelming share of independents who all of a sudden said, oh, something different, I'll go there.
Right. He wasn't Coakley.
Right, exactly.
That's who he was.
And that's the pressure with a two-party system, right? You have two alternatives, and then you have people who are in the middle, where I think a lot of sensible people stand, and then they have to go for something new that's really something old.
Yeah. I thought this was a pretty high-stakes election. There were 59 seats in the Senate, and that 60th vote was so coveted that I think many people really saw it as a choice of electing health care or not electing health care rather than electing Brown or electing Coakley. And so in many ways, this was a referendum on, I agree with you, independent voters and their perception of health care reform. Now, some people are hardcore progressives who say this is not a progressive health care policy. Then there are people who are on the right, who are a little more, at least fiscally conservative, who say that this policy doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The dollars and cents don't add up. There just aren't any sort of hard numbers that show how this is going to be economically viable and how it's not going to crumble the industry. So I think that was one big issue. The other issue is this is a referendum on jobs. You know, whenever you have a democratically controlled Congress and a Democrat in the White House, or the opposite, you know, it's hard to keep winning statewide elections because typically people aren't happy with that much control unless there's an extraordinary amount of prosperity. Even with Reagan, when unemployment begins to drop, you know, in '84, you still find it almost impossible. In fact, it was impossible for Reagan to control both sides of the Congress because people are uncomfortable with that, and because there's a large chunk of the country who don't like the way the country's going. With unemployment in double digits, nobody is trying to add another Democrat to the mix. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to them.
But see, the thing is interesting. So somebody said, well, Obama should have focused more on the economy and left this health care alone for another fight, another day. He should have talked about putting people to work instead of giving people health care. Was that the strategy?
Well, if you buy Obama's argument, right, which is that they're not competing agendas, that a comprehensive healthcare reform package will actually strengthen the economy, then you'd say, well, no. And I don't disagree with that premise. I think the policy that actually developed will not strengthen the economy. So that's a different issue. If Obama had committed himself entirely to the economy, I think he would have had even less political capital in 2010, and it would have been impossible for him to get any kind of sweeping domestic policy through during an election, a midterm election year, where people are running from Obama. See what happens with cap and trade. Ain't nobody going to do cap and trade. People are running from Obama right now. Imagine trying to start a healthcare conversation right now when people don't have jobs at the 12% range, 13% range, and unemployment is in the 20s. I mean, underemployment, is in the 20s.
So he spent all his political capital on healthcare, and he's bankrupt now.
He's almost.
Well, he wasn't spending capital. Remember, when he and Hillary were running, there was a reason why Barack started to take off to start with. Then everybody gets a little, forgetful of that fact. They poured tons of money into him and Hillary. And I said, from that moment forward, I said that basically what they're doing is they're paying down on 40 million new customers.
Yeah.
And because if you read that bill, there's nothing in that bill that cuts costs. You know, a sensible thing, which was said by, it was a German researcher. In any case, the whole point was that you would have, if America had just taken, okay, these are the top whatever procedures that we have, and this is what they cost in other countries, and why are we paying so much and having lower outcomes?
For me, I didn't become overwhelmingly concerned when the election was lost in Massachusetts, because I felt that the bill that we have now, or the bill that they're working through, is so compromised that it doesn't meet the basic needs, right? I think I kind of stand with Mark in the beginning. I think Obama struck at the right moment, because as you have an economic downturn and people are starting to deal with unemployment and underemployment in real ways, the concerns of health care become very real as well. And this was the moment for him to strike. The catch is that he wasn't able to build the political capital in a way to produce a strong bill that supported everyday citizens, right? The political capital he was able to pull together presented functionally two weak bills, right, that reinscribed a similar system. And now even that bill is not going to go through. So people will do a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking and say, well, he shouldn't have done it then and he should have waited. But I think it was the right opportunity. The problem is that we had the wrong bill, and we have people, there still wasn't a sufficient amount of education amongst the populace on health care and what the benefits of a comprehensive health care or universal health care would actually bring people.
And I think it comes with, I'm actually literally crying about this healthcare thing right now. I think part of it came with the level of arrogance to the Obama administration.
We know what's best, that statement.
We know what's best, and the American people will ride with us on this. He came in with a sweeping mandate. He came in with overwhelming popularity, and I think he thought that he could just walk this thing down the hall. And it turned out that, one, the American people were very much for universal health care until they found out what it was.
Right.
Until they found out, and then when the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, starts to talk, right, when they started saying, well, this doesn't jive, these numbers don't match up, and then when Obama took 6 months to really offer any kind of hardcore numbers, I mean, he spoke in sweeping generalities the entire summer, up until the summer. You know, when he gave that healthcare press conference, the one where Henry Louis Gates came up at the end, that was the first time where he gave any nuts and bolts stuff, and even then there were no numbers.
He let the Republicans define the conversation.
That's exactly right. And then there was a whole summer of town hall meetings. So there was suddenly an uprising, a sort of populist uprising from the right that said, look, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and we don't like it. And the Obama administration put people like Sheila Jackson Lee out there who were answering cell phones, you know, while cancer patients are talking, whether it's right or wrong, and even the point, it's bad PR.
Right.
They hadn't, people like John Kynes, who I respect immensely, hadn't read the bill and admitted he hadn't read the bill. So you had Democratic members of Congress asleep at the wheel, looking bad. Obama hadn't taken leadership on it. He put the two most divisive figures in the Congress right now, Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, in the front of a bill when he was the most popular person in the world at the time.
Right.
That just was not wise, and what he was trying to do was hide from a bill in case it became controversial.
That's right.
That was unwise, and so what he ended up with was a bill that was so contested before he even got to the table that was inevitably, as Dr. Lewis said, inevitably compromised. The House bill is the progressive version, and it ain't got nothing in it.
Right.